So, everybody having a really good time so far? Good event? Been fun? There we go. That's what I like. So, we're going to talk a little bit about malware analysis. Ultimately, and kind of to get into this before we get to all the disclaimers and stuff, I built this to make the concept of malware analysis accessible. Because a bunch of people were coming to me, and even me early in my career, I said, I really want to do malware. And everybody said, you can't. I said, well, why can't I? They said, it's dangerous. It's too hard. You can't do it. So make no mistake, this is everybody here can take this stuff and go do it. And I'll give you some tips on how to be safe with that and stuff, but it is not in any way advanced. I'm not breaking any ground. I'm not doing anything amazing. This is accessible for everybody. So for anybody who didn't see my talk yesterday, I am Shawn, or understudy. I am the head of forensics and incident response engineering at Yahoo. I will disclaim now that none of what we're going to talk about today has anything to do with Yahoo to make my legal rep happy, who's here. I've been giving this talk long before I went to Yahoo. Actually from my breach consultant days, where I used to travel around and do threat hunting and help people out through major breaches and malware outbreaks. I've worked a lot of malware outbreaks in that time. It's all secular. Everything just kind of goes. You'll get Dridex for a while and Emotep for a while and then crypto miners for a while, and then it all comes back. And full disclaimer, I'm rusty on this topic. That top line right there, head of, that means I'm in management. That means I don't do real work. That means other people do real work and they make me look good. But I've always liked talking about this and teaching this topic, so I continue to do it. So again, been a while since I've done it every day. There's a lot more than what I'm gonna cover. This is the tip of the iceberg of what you can do and accomplish. And to continue to level set, this is an introduction. I'm not gonna go through line by line on every registry change or any of that stuff and go through what all those look like and what they mean. I'm gonna show you the tools that will do that, and then you can take this and expand on it to go look into stuff yourself and play with samples and do things. We are gonna run real malware. That is part of this. So there's only a couple slides, and then we're gonna start playing with real malware on the hotel Wi-Fi, so y'all might wanna get off the hotel Wi-Fi. Just saying. So, what we're gonna use is a whole bunch of different stuff. This is an old version of Ubuntu 14.04 with Remnux. Remnux is a freely available open source malware analysis distro. There are several others. FireEye has Flare. Tsuragi is relatively new and kind of cool. I've always liked Remnux because that's kind of what I work in and I'm comfortable there. CyberChef. Does anybody know what CyberChef is? CyberChef is super magical because you can give it code and give it a formula and it will make the code something else. And we'll see that because it's really cool. We're gonna use some command line tools to look at the contents of PDFs, to look at the contents of Word documents and VBAs that exist. And we're also gonna jump into a VM and we're gonna look at how processes run and how registry changes happen and how we can watch network traffic and different ways to do that. And if we have time, which again, I can't see the timer, so we're gonna wing it, we'll look into Cuckoo Sandbox. So we'll basically take the things that we're gonna talk about doing manually and we'll go through the automated process of those things and how you can use that. I've always been a big fan of try to do it manually first before you automate something. That will bring you a level of understanding of what you look at that's valuable. So, the setup. Assume that you are a security analyst at the Daily Bugle. I love that picture. You got an alert or a notification about an email that has an attachment of a PDF. You've been sent a copy of that attachment to look into. Now we get to go into the good part. So, everything is kind of laid out very nicely in here for me. So right here, if you can see, this step one, that's our PDF. By the way, I don't mind pictures or anything, so if people want to take pictures of the screen or the commands, I have slides later that are really good to take pictures of that will walk through specific commands and places that you can go and resources and stuff. So if we go and pop open a terminal, which I have a special big one just for everybody, we have this PDF. We can go open this PDF, see what it does, and we'll do that too. But there's a couple tools that you can use just right off the cuff to look into a PDF right from a command line. One of them is called PDF ID. And all PDF ID is gonna do is tell you a couple things. So if I look at PDF ID on step one, that's gonna tell me stuff about this file. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this, and again, like I'm not going to go through every one of those. That would take all day just on this. Third from the top, embedded file, 1. This PDF has an embedded file. That's kind of interesting. What is in this PDF? Why is there a file there? Well, we can look at that a couple different ways. We can use something called PDF parser. And I need to do more on that. So for anybody not familiar with Linux, is everybody kind of baseline familiar with Linux and like how to use? Okay, I'm gonna work on that assumption for now. I have given this talk from middle schoolers to DEF CON. So I try to adjust it for the audience as much as necessary. So if we go through this, we can see, all right, there's our embedded file. Let's look at some more. Oh, type file spec 602803.docm. Anybody know what a docm is? Go ahead. Exactly. A docm is a document that contains a macro. So it contains VB code that can run in a document, if you enable it, because computers are smarter than they used to be, where they're always enabled. So we can look at this an easier way, though, too. We can use the same thing that we would use if we wanted to pull out that file, and that's called PDF detach. If you do a list, step 1, there you go. One embedded file, that's what it is. Now, if I want that file, because obviously I want that file, right? That's the interesting thing for me. Well, there's only one file, so I'm just gonna do a save all. That's just gonna go save that file for me. If I pop back into my folder, my docm is there. So now we have a couple different ways that we can approach the docm. The first thing that we'll do before we actually dive into like looking at the code is I'll just go open it up. And then we'll talk about like looking at how we can extract different things. So I'm gonna pop open a VM here. I'm gonna grab my document, yank it over, eventually. There's a hefty demo component to this, by the way, so everybody has to bear with me. Everybody says that I am brave to give a talk that is all demo. You're gonna grab, there we go. So we're gonna use a couple different tools to look at this. We're gonna use Process Explorer, which is a free Windows system internal tool. Basically every tool that we're gonna talk about, completely and totally free, by the way. So there's zero investment on anybody's part to do any of this if they wanted to do it at home. It's gonna start eventually, I promise. There we go. And we're gonna use another tool, and if anybody's done this before, y'all are probably familiar with Wireshark. We'll get into Wireshark a bit later. We're gonna use another tool called Fiddler for this. I actually really like Fiddler because I like the way it lays out information. But it really only handles URL requests. It doesn't particularly do a good job with IPs and stuff, depending on what they are. It's basically it's a web debugger, but it looks good. So when we run this, we want to see what happens in Process Explorer more than anything else, because Process Explorer's contents are subject to change. As new things happen, they go away. A long, long time ago, there was a tool called HB Gary's Flypaper that doesn't exist since Anonymous attacked HB Gary, and I can't find a copy of it anywhere, and I don't know if there's an alternative for it that does not allow processes to close. But for now, you just got to pay very close attention down here as I start to run stuff. We can just drop Fiddler over here in a corner and look at it later, because that's going to save everything. So we'll open our Word document first, shrink this down, move it over to this side. You can see winword.exe right here. Now, let's enable that macro. Now let's see what happens. Oh, winword.exe just did some stuff, including some PowerShell, and that's just a lot of stuff. So winword.exe launched a macro, which turned on PowerShell. PowerShell went out, did some numbers. Right now, we'll just say PowerShell did numbers, because that's pretty much what this is. There's an easier way to document and find this, though. There's a tool called OLE-VBA. If you decode with OLE-VBA on step 2, I will need some more of this. Now it's going to tell us everything about this macro. So we have cmd.exe, that's what launched, right, when we open the Word document. PowerShell, window-style hidden executable bypass, all different PowerShell commands to do different things, mostly to hide its own process. And then we get into this string of numbers. Numbers, 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 numbers. Lots of numbers, and then a little bit at the end. And the nice thing about OLE VBA is it will also tell you some other stuff. So runs when it's open, might run a suspicious file, has some hex strings, has cmd.exe. So it'll give you a couple indicators that can be really useful to understand what goes on, as well as giving you the content. But what you do is you take that content, copy and paste that out. Got to go all the way over here. There's our whole content. What we want, though, is everything from those numbers. That's the part that's important. Those numbers in the parentheses down to the bottom. That's our encoded text document. From there, we'll jump into CyberChef. This is decimal encoded, effectively. So numbers, and it's decimal encoded, comma delimited. And if you take a look at CyberChef, you can see there's a billion different things that you can look into and do with it. Hexadecimal, decimal, base 64. Every challenge coin I've ever designed, I literally write something, put it into base 64, and then put base 64 around the outside. And CyberChef is great for that. So if we use this decimal piece here, now we have data. That's now going to start telling us stuff. That's what that code does. Computer interprets decimal code, does these things. Here's what your code looks like. But there's further encoding in here, and we're going to get to that in a minute too. So we can scroll through this, and we can look at everything that it does. But to make it easier, I'm going to open it up over here, because I should have that too. I do not. Well, that's cool. We'll look at it here. So one of the things that you'll see as we go through this, though, is you see URLs. URLs is really interesting. Let's take that and pivot back over here for a second. Let's go look at that fiddler output. So much crap. Right here. That looks strange. Both of those two. None of those are tools that are trying to execute on the system. Those all happened after we ran PowerShell. By the way, all this infrastructure for this piece of malware, it's all dead. That's why it's broken up into each individual piece of the copy, because it's all dead. So we have these three things that were attempted to reach out to. Martin J. Feller, AudiHD, and Uchida Shika. Well, let's take a look and go back over to these URLs. Well, how do we get those? So if you look at the way that's laid out, you see how it's number, number, number? And then you'll see just after the TAC F, you'll see in single quotes HTTP, TTP, Y45, so on and so forth. So it's basically like a shift. So that number 10 is the 10th thing if you count along there. The number 1 is the first thing if you count along there. So there is a how-to that exists right here. So you break up each one of those from 0 to 20, because there's 20, and then you put them together, 10, 1, 13, 20, 5, and that'll build out your whole list of URLs. And do those three look familiar to the three that we just saw a second ago? Was that not a much easier way to do this? Actually, that part right there, doing that, takes a little bit of time. But this is at minimum a much safer way to do this, because you don't actually have to execute anything. So we can do that across the whole thing, and then we'll get to a finished section. Oh, there it is without the stuff. I knew I had it. Sorry, this is the second talk, and Sunday is always hard because I'm always so tired. So let's take a look at that deobfuscated now as a whole thing put together. So hit Command-EXE, use PowerShell, window style hidden, executable bypass. Set item to file XOR key. URLs go here. So go here, download something. Write to host URL. So write whatever comes from the host to the URL. And then do a couple other things here, right? So use that unXOR to make that thing that's downloaded function. And I'm totally not going to get into the whole concept of like XORing and all that stuff because one, I don't remember most of it, and two, again, that would be like a whole talk. But it's saying very directly, write this fiat cmm.exe after you download a file from here, write it as this and then do some stuff to it so it becomes what it's supposed to be. So if you did what most people did and just grabbed this URL and went out and did a wget for it so that you could go pull down the file safely, it's not a complete file. We can actually look at that because I have both of them. So step 7 being the file when you go out and wget, step 8 being the completed file. We'll pull a hash on that, and then we'll pull a hash on the next one. They are not the same. And that is because there's a specific piece in that VB code that changes them and changes the file with that XOR to make it actually function and work. Good to know as you're coming into this and looking at some of this stuff. So, we'll come back over to this, maybe. So we have a copy of this file. We know what this does. We know where it calls out to get the file. We know what the file is going to be named when it drops. And we know where we're going to go to next. Now we're going to move away from the command line backend stuff that's getting us this information, and I'm going to actually go run this file. This is like the fun part to me. So we'll get rid of Fiddler. We'll move into Wireshark for this. We'll keep Process Explorer. Open up Wireshark. Start a capture. I'm really only going to focus on TCP traffic, if that works, because there isn't any yet. Copy our file over here, and hopefully this has been on long enough that I won't have too much junk that's trying to get run when we do a couple other things here. So there's another tool. So we've talked about Process Explorer a little bit in Wireshark, and we'll get to that. Let's talk about RegShot for a second. Basically, RegShot will go take a look at your Windows registry, which the Windows registry is a massive pile of crap. It will take a picture of it, and then you take a second picture of it, and it will compare those two pictures. You would be amazed how much everything touches the registry. Go install Discord on a Windows box, run RegShot before you do it. It'll change like 500 things in your registry. Like that's just what every application does because the registry is a giant piece of crap. Sorry. I'm not a Windows fan in any way, shape, or form. I think I did incident response long enough to kind of develop a hatred for Windows. Nope. But let's take a snapshot. See where we're at in our registry now, and then we'll see where we're at with our registry after we run this file. And we'll pay close attention to that Process Explorer as we run the file as well. First shot's out of the way. Throw it over to the side. We don't got to worry about it. Give this a rename so it can actually execute. Yes, let it execute. Now let's go ahead and run it. So some stuff happened. We see this file running, and then suddenly we see servicehost.exe. Servicehost.exe is a basic Windows running service. Now we don't see our file anymore, but we still see servicehost.exe. But if you look at the command line for that, servicehost.exe basically replacing that step 8 file into servicehost. So it's hooking into a Windows command file to hide itself so it can stay running and persistent on a system and now look like servicehost. That's pretty much what this thing does. It will also, if we can get some network traffic here, which we can, we've got some callouts. It's the only TCP traffic on this box, these 3 IPs. And it tries to use an old, outdated Symantec SSL cert, which is really interesting. So it'll encrypt the traffic, and it's running 4743. So we've now learned a lot about this file, what it does, where it hides, all that kind of stuff, except for our other reg shot. Let's take a look at that too. This one takes a minute. Now we can compare. So, we see some keys added. SVC host, that's what we were seeing. So we see registry changes to SVC host from this. File extensions is when I rename stuff. Enable file tracing, enable console tracing. These are all values in registry that you can go look up that do different things. We'll go look for files, we'll look for specific things, we'll do all different types of stuff. Not every one of these is going to be related, because as you can see, there's a lot here. 40 total changes in our time window. And there we go. So from piece to piece, and we'll get to Cuckoo in a second, but let's jump back here for a second. As a security person, what do we learn? Anybody want to give a crack? What do we learn that would be useful to us as we continue to investigate this? Go ahead. Yep. We learned C2 location. We learned URLs where it's coming from. We learned registry changes that it makes. We learned persistence mechanism into SVC hosts. These are all things that we can use to help clean up or further scope the situation. Did any other host reach out to those URLs? Is the C2 prevalent anywhere else? Do we see hashes from that legitimate file anywhere? Anybody have any other thoughts on that? Go ahead. Exactly. And you're able to know how to better fix it. In most cases with malware, you just reimage the box and move on, but you can't forget the scoping process of where else might it be. So we can also take some actions up front. We can block or monitor access to those URLs. Can't go to the URL. URL's hard-coded in the VB script. Can't go there, can't download malware, can't infect computer. Problem solved. We can block and monitor the callouts. That won't stop us from an infection, but that will stop the infection from being able to do additional things. That's good. If we're using EDR, we can block and monitor those MD5s. If we're logging PowerShell, which is event ID 4104, we can look for suspicious PowerShell commands. And this is kind of a cool thing to look for if you're in a Windows environment that runs PowerShell anyway. Command logging for Windows-style hidden and executable bypass, which a lot of sysadmins will use that stuff. But if you can figure out how they do it and then kind of move them out of your equation, you can find some really cool, okay. You can basically find like the low-hanging fruit of malware like that, because it's still all Word document into VB into malware. This is old and it's still amazingly relevant to how companies get infected today. We have not gotten better with that. And you can actually send any of your captured files to an AV vendor. So I was doing an Emotech case once upon a time. Polymorphic, meaning every time it installs, it changes. New hashes, new everything. And I think I submitted something like 150 variants that I caught of it in one environment to their AV vendor, so their AV vendor could quickly build out stuff to better contain it within their environment. It's a good option to work with your AV vendor if you have something like that. So before we move on, well, we can actually talk about this, then we'll go into the sandbox stuff. So if anybody, these are all like the picture slides. Like those are the commands that got run. For anybody who wants to take it, I'll leave it up for a minute. I'm gonna like jump forward and then I'm gonna like jump back real quick when I get too far, because I don't know what slide's next. As I see cameras not there. As cameras come down, then I will, okay. We'll save that one for later. So, let's talk about how you can do this from an automated fashion. Everybody following along so far, by the way? Like, any questions before we get into, like...
I do have a question.
Please.
You mentioned that by using wget, you wouldn't be able to get the full file. What would be another way that you would suggest for a person to get the file that the malware would send you to get?
Let the thing execute in a safe environment and grab a copy there. because to be completely honest, I don't know how to like inject that XOR key in to make it function. I'm sure someone does who's much smarter than I am, but I don't. Like, I got the full file by letting it run and pulling down a copy of the full file.
Easiest, safest way. Just
Yeah.
let it execute and get your file that way.
Yep.
Very awesome.
Please.
So the polymorphic malware you're dealing with, is it really any point in getting the attributes from that, or just empty the system?
Getting what?
Like get the attributes like the file name, the size.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you said it keeps changing. Like,
It keeps changing, but there are things that are similar. So actually, in this one, you want to know, I'll tell you how I scoped it across an environment. Every single copy of it was between like 52 and 64 kilobytes, and it was unsigned. So I looked for every unsigned file in an entire environment between 52 and 64 kilobytes. And that actually scoped it near perfectly. It was kind of amazing. Please, go ahead.
Regarding the question about like the XOR version of the file versus like the plain navigated one, you just take the key, like copy the cyber chef, and then it's the XOR file.
Maybe, but I don't know how to do it. It's possible, but XORing is above me for the most part. So we're going to close this down for a second, and then we'll run, and I'll take a couple more questions once we get to the running part. So is anybody familiar with like sandboxes, Cuckoo Sandbox specifically? Cuckoo Sandbox is a free open source malware sandbox. It's kind of super useful and not too difficult to set up. And like I have it set up on here kind of specifically so that I can show folks like how it works. So like this is Cuckoo Sandbox in a nutshell. So we're just going to go click submit a file. We will grab our exe file right here. We will open that file. It's going to move us to a page. We can say we want internet, we don't want internet. We want to do internet simulator or Tor, like a Tor router. You can set up all that stuff in here. You can run a timeout, short, medium, long. We're going to go with short for this. Enable remote control, injection, memory dumps. You can pull full PCAP into Archemy, formerly known as Moloch. Like a lot of integrations as an open source project to basically go run this stuff. And then it will tell you things. And the reason why I like doing this afterward is because a lot of what we already found, you will find, and we will see in this. But hopefully you will have a bit more of an understanding of where it came from if you're not familiar with this. This will take a couple minutes to analyze, but before I go into questions as it starts, I want to show kind of why I let it run on here, if it works. So it's booting up exactly what we were just using, by the way. So VMware Workstation, this is set up with a script. It'll automatically boot to VMware Workstation. It runs in VMware Workstation. It's just going to move the mouse around a whole bunch to simulate user input. It's going to let it hang for a little while, run the file, and then it's going to close this out and print out a report of everything that happened. So basically the stuff we did, the network traffic monitoring, the process monitoring, the registry stuff, it's doing all that in the background, scripting it, and then sending it to a finished report. Does it catch everything? No. It's slow. You can only leave it open for so long. A lot of times on old samples, I'd leave them running for 2 or 3 days just to monitor if there's any new network traffic that comes into a sample, or if anything else happens that's scheduled to happen later if I'm doing dynamic analysis. Earlier on, we did some low-level static analysis. I should explain the differences there. That's like looking without interacting. Dynamic is like full-on, let's run it, let's interact, let's have a party and burn some shit down. So while this runs, and it's going to take a little while to generate the report, other questions that I can answer? Oh, that was quicker than I thought. But anything else that anybody wants to know? Cool. So let's take a look at this report and see what we see. So this file is very suspicious. That's the first indicator right there. It tells you straight up, hey, this is probably not great. So let's scroll down through our report and see what we see. Queries for computer name. Collects information to fingerprint the system. Let's open up some of these. Because we saw some of this stuff when we were going through. Tries to locate browsers. Creates suspicious process. There's our suspicious process, the service host exe right there. There's a really good SANS poster, by the way, folks. It's like the Windows sysinternals one. Any of this stuff is helpful with Windows system internals because most malware authors want to inject in something like service host or LSAS or common Windows processes because they can hide those because those are supposed to be running on your system. They don't exactly call their stuff like malware click me or totally not malware. I've actually seen a few where the service running name was like totally not malware. That's always fun. So tries to look for sniffers. Detect network interfaces. And these are all color coded, so they get worse as they go from a risk level, right? So looking for AV, delete itself from disk. It wasn't on the desktop anymore. Once it ran and injected, it was gone. Collects information about installed applications. Queries details from the computer, which are a lot. Connects to an IP address that no longer exists. Well, there's the IP address that we saw in Wireshark. It looks for that too. And then, of course, like I got time, .my Windows and all that. Oh, sorry about that. That is my wife. So, there's also a ton of other windows that exist, right? There's some static analysis, if that's your jam. This is going to tell you a bunch of stuff about the file. Any external artifacts that might exist, or any extracted artifacts, which there aren't any. Behavioral analysis of the file. So that's our process tree right there. That's exactly what we looked at in Process Explorer. Process tree, dridex.exe to SVC host. And then if you have some of the network stuff, more and more of it set up, you'll see more and more of it as you go. But there's our IP stuff. And like I was saying, you can pivot to Archimede/Moloch because it used to be Moloch. You do that right there, pivot in and look at the packets if you want to connect that stuff together. Dropped files, this being the dropped file. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but everybody kind of gets the point. We've now in 30 seconds done what we did in the last half hour, roughly. But I still like to do stuff manually, and I like to teach it manually. So let's pivot back over here for a second. So now we're at like the take a picture slides. So if people want to take a picture, like these are some really great resources for this stuff. Virus total, URL void, IP void. The next slide is going to be places that you can go download live malware. So before I show the next slide, I do want to take a minute and talk about like the sandbox setup and like having good hygiene on stuff. This computer is a Linux box by itself with a Windows VM. It has never been logged into on any of my personal accounts. I have throwaway accounts for every single thing that's on this box because it's full of live malware. Like that is what's on this box. Every USB drive in my house is also probably full of live malware, if I'm honest. So if you're ever like, if I ever give you a USB drive, probably don't plug it in. But like make sure you take care to protect yourself if you're gonna do it. I wanna make this accessible, but I also want people to like understand that like malware can do bad stuff to you. So if you're gonna play with this stuff, which I encourage everybody to do, turn off your network adapter first. You can totally do that. If you don't want to, grab a VPN, do something else. Use hotel Wi-Fi like I am. Don't log into personal accounts. Don't have anything, because so much of this, the commodity stuff is account stealer. They're gonna go look for like your personal accounts to steal stuff. It's all in the commodity kind of crime, financial gain kind of place. Like that's what a lot of malware is, until you get into very specialized stuff, which no one would ever let me talk about on a stage. So just take care and have a sanitized environment. The reason why I don't run this as a lab or like a multi-day training is because every time I've tried, people come with like their primary workstation. I'm like, I don't think you want to do this on your primary workstation. So I've moved away from doing it that way. Get a tiny little cheap computer, like a used school computer, whatever the case may be, but like just be safe if you're gonna play with this stuff. And I say that before I post this slide, because that is like where all the malware can exist. End of speech. I'm probably really early, but thank you. Yes, I can. Anybody got any questions, curiosities, gripes? Please.
When it comes to analyzing malware, I've read and come across certain old malware that originally doesn't do much, but once you detonate them or click on the link per se, after a period of time, it changes into something else. What would be the best way for you to analyze something like that?
Run it long term. So I mentioned a little earlier, one of the things that I used to do a lot was leave something running for 2 or 3 days. Collect all network traffic that took place on that box over 2 or 3 days, collect any processes that picked up, and collect all registry changes over 2 or 3 days to see what kind of changes are made. New malware, by the way, probably, I wouldn't be able to do shit here because most of them won't even run in a VM anymore. Because the first thing they do is go look to see if it's a VM and then they stop running. Or they change the way that they run to make it not look as bad. Malware's getting smarter. Anybody else? Please.
How would you look at something like that?
On hardware?
Okay, so you would have a computer set up that you just
Yep.
run it and you can wipe it as needed?
Yeah, or, throw it in a cloud instance somewhere.
Oh, okay.
Would you recommend using fake net or setting up the remnants box as a fake internet, like using InetSim or some other tool in order to do kind of like that without automatically having it reach out to the internet?
Oftentimes, yes. The problem is, though, is when you're looking at attack paths, right, that require you to go out to the internet. So if all I had was that PDF, and I got that Word document, and then it goes to these websites, and I need that to execute, I need it to go to the internet. That's part of making this work. I don't get the file unless that goes to the internet. So I've always been maybe even a little careless sometimes, at least at my own home, because I let stuff connect to the internet. I use onboard VPNs. I have VPNs in a segmented network at my house to do this stuff. But you could always tether it to your phone too. That's not a bad math. That's actually pretty good. I didn't think about that before, but I might start tethering to my phone when I do this stuff. Go ahead.
How do you tackle larger binaries for dynamic analysis, particularly if they're using anti-VM, anti-sandbox techniques, and looking at red networks of that nature, where it's heavily obfuscated by nature?
Good question, and I do not have a good answer. But you stumped me on a question, so you're going to get a present. Who else has something, by the way? Please.
So you suspect a virus is hiding inside of an SVC host process. How would you manually go to dialing it to see if that's a legitimate process?
So SVC host, by its very nature, is a very legitimate process, which is why it gets misused a lot and why malware will try to use it. SVC host is necessary for Windows to run. Come on up. So when you have malware that's hijacking processes, you can kill that malware, congratulations, to kind of kill that process and hope that you can restart it if there's no scheduled task that jumps in or does anything to basically re-up it next time. Or you can re-image the box because you've got core Windows processes that are screwed. In this case, it's just looking like it's running SVC host and naming itself SVC host effectively.
I just didn't know if there's any quick and dirty PowerShell kind of see this has a child process that just looks suspicious as to looking at it and being okay, this one was going on.
Oh, like SVC host or not? In my experience, it's been a lot of looking at those parent-child process relationships, right? Which means you have to have some form of visibility when you start to look at it. So why is SVC host being spun up out of this executable? That's weird. Or why is Chrome launching my winlogin.exe? That's weird. Anybody else? Please.
So based off of what you mentioned earlier, you're saying that most of the more advanced malware is not really going to be able to run in sandboxes. Do you find it's more effective for you just to that you have to do looking at the source code for the malware, do your analysis, and pull off IOC?
Far smarter people than me do that.
Okay.
I don't. I would actually recommend a class, and I should have put it in the slides. A friend of mine goes by the name of Mobius. His Twitter's Malware Mobius. He does like an entry level, very affordable, like actual RE class. Because like this is an RE. And I don't know when he's going to kick it off again, but his class is great. And it's not sans expensive, which is also great. It's only like a couple $100. But it's like a multi-week full-on RE, like Gidra, all the works, in getting into that stuff, because that's what he does for a living. Back there.
More of a comment, in case anybody wants to use Cuckoo Sandbox. I think they, I guess, essentially stopped dev back in 2019.
Did they really?
But someone's forked it, and you can do, it's on GitHub, it's Kate V2, and they continued dev on it. And then they've also added, like, configuration, like, malware configuration parsing. So it'll parse out malware config based on, I think, Kevin the Hermit's work that he's done there.
Oh, nice.
Definitely check out Kate V2.
That's fantastic. Good to know. Thank you. Please.
This goes back to the child parent processes. Do you ever come across the malware that does like BFIT spoofing, and how do you tackle that?
So I've never come across one myself, so I don't have a good answer for that one either. But you already got a present. Anybody else, folks? Back there.
Do you have some specific advice as to what versions of the operating system we can use for the guest or software that's installed in it?
For VMware, you mean? So test for your environment. Like, always test for your environment. So, like, this is old because when I built this box, it was Windows 7 was my environment. So I was testing for my environment. But genuinely, you should always test for what you're testing it against. You know, XP is not going to do you much good if everybody's on Windows 10 or Windows 11 now. Is it 11 now? Again, I don't use Windows. So, that helpful? All right, somebody, I thought I saw another hand. Go ahead.
So I know Cuckoo Sandbox supports multiple different virtual machine technologies. Which one would you think of as the least painful to initially set up?
VMware.
VMware?
Yeah. What's the other one? The free one by VirtualBox. VirtualBox is a giant piece of crap. I hate VirtualBox. VMware I like. VMware is expensive, but I like VMware.
You do VM player too. That's free.
That one I don't know. Oh, yeah? So just like take a community college class and get free VMware?
Or even cancel it for your,
Oh, perfect.
sign up, get an email address.
Perfect. I like it. Well, I mean, you know, that's questionable. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. It's an idea. What else y'all got? Go ahead.
Do you have any horror stories of the time you're kind of careless analyzing malware at home or anything?
Yes. And thankfully, nothing bad ever happened. I started to dig into something that I thought was going to be like no big deal, just some commodity piece of something. And it started to do some really weird stuff. And I can't really get into the weird stuff because that would give away much. And come to find out that it looked like a very highly targeted piece of something with a person on the other end. And I didn't have any of my VPNs or anything on. So I really thought like somebody was going to come attack the shit out of me. I really did. Thankfully, that never happened, but I thought I was screwed for a little bit. What else, folks? All right, cool. Then I guess that's it. Thank you all, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the con.